Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the In Talks With podcast with me, Danielle. Kaat Debo is the director and chief curator at MoMu, the fashion museum in Antwerp, in Belgium. Belgium, of course, is famous as a key fashion location, not just for producing contemporary star names such as Raf Simons and Glenn Martens, but also for the Antwerp Six, a group of designers who came to prominence in the 90s and were made famous for their groundbreaking designs. In September of this year, MoMu reopened after an expansive renovation which was begun in 2018. Kaat came on the podcast to speak to me about what it's like being at the forefront of progressive museum thinking, from experimenting with live and digital performances to challenging the authority of the institution's voice. Have a listen, and I hope you enjoy. First of all, tell me a bit about, I'm in London, you're in Antwerp. Tell me a bit about what it's like there. I'm interested to understand what it's like just in terms of the COVID situation.
Well, I think it's getting better. We are getting a little bit more freedom since, let's say, last week. And from the 1st of October onwards, we are not obliged anymore to wear masks. So now in the museum, only the staff is wearing face masks, and the visitors are encouraged to wear a mask, but are not obliged. So we are in this sort of gray in-between zone where we're letting go of the rules. But it's still a bit scary, yeah? Because we I think in this part of Belgium, I think more than 85% of population is vaccinated. So that's a good thing. But still, amongst children, it's going around the virus. So I really, I'm a little bit scared for autumn, which is like the season of the colds and the flu, and how the virus will evolve. But I'm happy to be open with the museum, because I think, of course, the timing was sort of somehow positive for us that we were not open during the sort of the sessions of lockdowns, because I know from other colleagues, other directors of museums in Antwerp, that it was super heavy, that it's super intense, changing the rules all the time, changing also the amount of people that were allowed in museums. There's a lot of loss of ticket income. So it's been very intense, but it's been that way for everybody, I think, and for all sectors.
It sounds like it's very similar to where we're at here in London in terms of rates and people's attitudes towards it as well. What's it like? How have you noticed people who visit the museum now? Was there a slight trepidation when it first reopened, and people not knowing whether to wear their mask, or are people very relaxed? What's the feeling?
I think people behave really well, I must say, because last week we decided or we communicated that it's not obliged anymore to wear a mask, but let's say 95% of visitors still wear their masks. So I think people are, or maybe also not ready to get rid of the mask. We also already had a number of events in the museum. We had our reopening. We had two separate opening nights to spread the amount of people, which we organized with a COVID safe ticket, which is obliged here for events over 200 people. And we had a lot of extra staff in order to inform people, to guide them around in the museum, and it went super smooth. People were really I think looking forward to an event, but I think they were also very happy that it was organized in a safe way.
So for people who don't know Antwerp and don't know MoMu, I myself have never visited, although I would very much like to, and I look forward to visiting as soon as possible. Can you give me a sense of where it is situated in the city and what it's like as a building?
Well, it's the museum is situated in the heart of the historic center of Antwerp, near the cathedral, near a lot of other museums. So it's located really in the heart of the city. We're Antwerp is how do I it's often described as a kind of hidden gem, a sort of a pocket-sized metropole. It's not to be compared with cities like London or Paris. It's a city of 500,000 inhabitants. It feels like a village, but I think because we're in the middle of Europe, we're only 2 hours away from Paris by train. 3 hours from London, 1 hour and a half from Amsterdam. We're really in that. That's what makes Antwerp interesting to me. That there's a high quality of life, but you can easily escape. And I myself also often needed it to go to Paris, to London, in order to get the energy of a metropole. And and the museum is located in a 19th century building. It used to be a hotel, and it had over time it had a lot of different destinations, and then it was first renovated end of the 90s by a Ghent-based architect Marie-Josée Van Hee. And then the museum moved to this location and got its new director, Linda Loppa, who left the museum in 2007 in order to become dean of Polimoda in Florence. And then I took over as a director. And then, we had the second renovation now and extension of the museum over the past years. So that's why we were closed for 3 years.
And Belgium, well, especially Antwerp, has this sort of legendary connection to the fashion industry because it has produced so many very famous names. I mean, you think of in Belgium, when you think of a Belgian designer, you think of Raf Simons, but you think of also the Antwerp Six, famously, who came out of Antwerp as well. And the fashion museum itself, I think, has been open. Is it since 2002?
Yeah.
Itself, and then it's had sort of several iterations, but it most recently, I think this year, had this reopening where you added a lot more space. So what is it? What sets MoMu apart, would you say, from other fashion institutions?
Maybe it's our approach to fashion curation. I think we've always tried to bring a context for fashion. We've done that often with our exhibition designs, which when we started 20 years ago was not really common. I think now, over the whole let's say discipline of fashion curation and fashion exhibitions changed a lot over the past 20 years, and we all know that we've seen a boom in fashion exhibitions, and I think it all started off with the McQueen exhibition in the Met. And fashion exhibitions have become more and more spectacular. But this whole idea of presenting fashion, presenting clothes in a visual context 20 years ago, it was quite, I think, innovative. We've always tried to bring more than just clothing. I think that you can focus on a piece of clothing as a piece of art, or you can try to bring I think that clothing is just one of the end products of the creativity of a designer. I think designers create images, create a lot of things that go along with their collections. And
I think you said once that fashion's about translating a body for a designer, and I like
also,
that quote.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also one of the challenges. How do you bring in that body in because it's the first thing you exclude as a museum, the body itself. And you work in a static context. And I think we've been experimenting quite a lot over the past years, because I believe that there are so many ways so many relevant ways to present or to curate fashion. And sometimes museums are, I think, a bit lazy. They work with mannequins, they work with busts, but they don't question, why and how you can bring it in a different way.
Diversity hasn't reached mannequin world yet.
Absolutely, and it's highly problematic. Yeah, it's highly problematic because indirectly, as a museum, you promote a sort of a beauty ideal. You promote a standard body, whether you like it or not, and we have to deal with it, and we have to communicate it also to our audience that it's a complex notion, that it's problematic. Also, the racial
how do you get
connotations.
How do you get around the issue?
Well, in this, I think there are different ways. There's not a handbook how to do it, because somehow you're also limited. It's not that the mannequins you purchase are mannequins that are not sort of created for the museum. These are mannequins that are created for commercial context, for shop windows.
So it's like that kind of standard skinny, long, perfect body,
mainly with like female. A Caucasian physiognomy.
Yes.
And I think you can, of course, bring in another body, another, whether it be people of color, whether it be people from different ages, you can bring it in through video, photography, but also in more experimental ways. With our current exhibition, Emotion, we start the exhibition and we end the exhibition with a live performance.
So just explain quickly for the listener what it is, that show that you've just opened.
Well, it's the title is Emotion, Fashion in Transition, and it focuses on the past 3 decades and on the different crises, disruptions, transformations that all have had an impact on fashion, and that have brought fashion and as an industry to where it is now, and to the challenges this industry is facing. And we've looked at these disruptions and on how fashion designers also have responded to it, and also on how they sometimes have almost anticipated these crises. It can be financial or economical crisis. It can be a health crisis, like, for example, the current pandemic, but also think of the HIV crisis in the 90s and its impact on fashion and how designers have responded to it. But also think about the ecological crisis we are facing. Also crisis like 9/11, which had a huge impact on fashion, which was, I think, particularly interesting because it also happened on the 4th day of Fashion Week in New York, and journalists, fashion journalists, were almost the first to be there to witness it and to report about it.
Yeah, and Walter van Beirendonck, he cancelled a collection, did he not? Because it was
he at that time he just stopped because the years before end of
I
the
should
90s,
say he's one of the we should explain who he is. He's a Belgian designer, and he's considered one of the famous Antwerp Six.
Yeah, he's one of the Antwerp Six. He's also head of the fashion department of the Royal Academy in Antwerp. And end of the 90s, he was a creative director of Wrangler, the jeans giant Wrangler. And when he stopped, he was not allowed to design it the first year under his own name. And he started a new label called Aesthetic Terrorists. And the idea was to question notions of beauty. Of beauty ideals, and to sort of attack it in an aesthetic way. And then happened 9/11, and he could not get his collections with the label Aesthetic Terrorists or with Prince Aesthetic Terrorists through customs. So you see that suddenly certain collections were unsellable. The same happened to Raf Simons, who had a fashion show with models wearing torches and with their faces covered in veils, and with prints on sweaters collapse. So suddenly these were sort of impossible collections to sell or to communicate. The same with Hussein Shalayan's collection that had completely different references, but also fashion photography. Yeah, you had photo shoots that we have an image, a very interesting image of Richard Bush, of a model covered in dust, and it looks she looks really similar to the people escaping the Twin Towers. And these were all images made during summer and were supposed to appear in the fashion issues in September. So they were withdrawn from these magazines. The same with some images of Tim Walker, of models falling from a skyscraper or appearing to fall from a building. Suddenly these images came too close to reality. And that's it somehow fashion seems to sometimes anticipate or forefeel. I don't know if you can say that in English.
I think anticipate is a good word.
Yeah,
it's interesting. And so with Emotion, the fashion in transition show of now, it sounds like you're covering all the big contemporary cultural themes. When you're
we touch upon a number of indeed important themes, and what we hope to do is to start a dialogue also with them, because of course we don't offer the answers. We ask a lot of questions, and what we do as a museum is give some historical context. That's why we're focusing on the past 3 decades, to give a historical context to also show how we've ended up here. And because I began my explanation or my answer by saying that we start the exhibition, we end the exhibition with a live performance, and the performance in the beginning it's a display case with a person standing or sitting in the display case, looking at him or herself in a mirror. And so the visitor is also looking at him or herself in the mirror, but also looking at the model. And so it's this sort of interaction between the performer and the visitor. And it's a very diverse cast of people, different ages, different color, different gender. So to bring in this diversity of people that you cannot bring into an exhibition with just mannequins. And also to question that notion of diversity of body types, and to start really the exhibition with this installation. The last installation is a performance that is not on every day. It's a performance we have on about 20 times during the entire exhibition. And it's a performance that we collaborated, for which we collaborated with the opera and ballet in Antwerp. We invited performer and director Benjamin Abel Nerhage, and he created a performance based on a number of interviews that we conducted with designers, but also with fashion schools from 8 different fashion schools all over the world during the pandemic. Because we really wanted to also have their perspective on fashion, and also to have their hopes and ambitions for the future of fashion. And Benjamin started with fragments of and quotes from these interviews and made it into a performance. So that it's quite an experimental way but I really felt that I wanted to have a sort of live performance in the exhibition, especially because also as a museum, me and my team, we have been working most of the time at home, which was super difficult to prepare an exhibition with everybody at home. And I really felt this need. I think a live performance is something very intimate. It's like an intimate gesture of a performer for an audience, and it's something unique. The performance you do one day is different than the performance that happens the next day.
I think also with live, I think it's particularly valuable in today's digital culture, where you can rewatch something a million times at your leisure. Yeah. So the idea of being at a certain place at a certain time feels more valuable.
Absolutely. One of the themes in the exhibition also deals with the internet and the whole digital evolution. And we have a huge LED wall with a LED wall with a montage of different films. Also, some films that were made by designers during the pandemic, because of course designers' fashion weeks were cancelled. They could not do a live catwalk show, so they were all forced to make video or digital presentations. And you also saw them struggle with it. Some, I think, were really boring, really not relevant, not interesting. And then I also asked myself the question: well, is it possible to have like a sort of emotional experience, connected to this? And I really believe that's possible. That's possible. And I think we have some examples of digital presentations that really succeeded very well. We have like a video of Dries van Noten, a presentation for which he collaborated with some Belgian choreographers, with, for example, Anne-Theresa de Keersmaker, but also Wim van de Keibus of Sidi Larbi Cherkaoui, who also danced themselves in the film, presenting at the same time the collection. It's super beautiful and emotional, I think, video. But also the impact that, for example, the internet had on the design process of designers, because you always focus on the front. What you see, a digital presentation of how we look at fashion shows on Vogue Runway. It's a slideshow of 30 images, and you just see the front. And also designers confirm that okay, we focus on what's there on the front with embroidery, with prints, but the back and the volume of a garment becomes sometimes less important. And then you have, for example, this beautiful Comme des Garçons collection, this flat collection, where she says, okay, then I make a 2D collection, a two-dimensional collection.
How does one bring that to life then? If you're looking at slides on an app that shows the catwalk collections and one only can see the front, how does one bring that to life?
Well, I think designers struggle with that. And I think that now some designers, in the interviews we had with designers, some said that they realize that it can also be interesting to do your storytelling in a digital way, that it opens new ways to do storytelling. And that I think it was Dries van Noten who told me that, yeah, I realize now that we haven't told certain stories, how labor intensive collections are, how our design process works. In the past, we haven't told these stories. And maybe that's why part of the audience maybe doesn't appreciate part of your collection, or maybe doesn't understand why it comes at a certain cost. And he said, yeah, well, I realize now that with all these digital tools, we can do our storytelling in a different way, which is also very interesting for an audience today. But I think that he wants, of course, to evolve to a sort of hybrid way of having a presentation, having a catwalk show, but also having videos and to do digital storytelling. And I think that a lot of designers will evolve in that way, to have these hybrid presentations.
I think what you said about you mentioned interactivity earlier, and how you try to invite a dialogue with your visitors, and I think that's really interesting and something I've really noticed change over the years with exhibitions, and something even before pandemic and since pandemic, the exhibitions I've been to, I've noticed how much more of an emphasis there is on interactivity. Mm-hmm. Even I think there's almost like a sense where there's almost this sort of childlike curiosity where people want to go and touch things, or press buttons and see how things work, or they expect to get involved in some way. Mm-hmm. So I think I sort of was interested in what you said about that. But I mean, I think what I'm interested to know as well is how you're obviously tackling these big issues, and it's all the exhibitions you put on are beautiful, but the themes you're addressing are very serious. How do you go about coming up with the ideas that you're going to talk about or represent in your shows?
I think it's of course a long process within the team, within the curatorial team. I have 2 curators, and we discuss these themes a lot. And I think that already for some time we and especially with the reopening of the museum, for us it was important to also make a kind of statement as a sort of fresh start. Okay, we reopen the museum, then maybe it's also important to reflect on the state of fashion today. We, of course, also discuss it with people not being a part of the team. And you have these sort of groups that you invite, or people you invite to discuss your themes, and you ask their responses. Which is a very labor-intensive process, but also a very interesting process. And I think that museums more and more realize that. I think in the past, museums really have been places or institutions of authority, and I think still also future audiences will look at museums as institutions of authority. But we have to realize that the voice that we bring is just one voice, and we have to allow in different perspective and different voices. And
that's really interesting.
Because it's a very tough process for museums, how to do that, and also to discuss that with your curators. Because I think for people that are working for a long time for a museum, it's that can be really scary. How do you do that? How do you do in different perspectives? And do you only bring in the perspective of the expert, or do you also bring in the perspective from just any visitor, your general audience? And how do you deal? And for our collection presentation, for example, it's not a chronological, not a linear presentation. We have a number of themes. For example, a theme that focuses on the link between art and fashion, a theme that deals with surrealism, and how a theme that deals with craftsmanship. And we have invited 5 different people with 5 very different backgrounds to reflect on the themes we bring. And it's super. And we worked that into an audio tour. So you can have, with your own smartphone, you can have you can follow their perspective on our curation. And
that's interesting. So who are these people? What kind of people are they? Are they sort of experts?
There's a graphic designer. There's an artist. There's a journalist, but they're not fashion experts. Of course, people with an interest in fashion. And it's very interesting to see how they reflect on our themes, how what surrealism, for example, means for them, and so I'm really happy with the result, because it brings in a new approach, an approach that we as curators or as museum experts don't think of. Things that maybe are
Wow, I think it's interesting, especially in this culture that we're living in, where there's almost been this kind of death of the expert, or this sort of idea that people who are experts are sort of part of this elite and not to be trusted. So I think that's a really interesting way of addressing that issue.
It's absolutely, because there's no handbook how to do this, how to interaction, participation, and it's true what you say. This sort of the expert, and I have a lot of conversations within my team, because they say, but we people will come to us to get the story for our expertise, and I still think we have to bring that and to communicate that expertise, but we also have to realize that we as museum also have our blind spots, and that we decide what stories we bring and what stories we don't bring. And I think in the past, museums not always were aware of that you are always selective in the stories that you bring. And to give, for example, an example, in our collection presentation, we also present a number of 18th century dresses in chintz, masterpieces of the museum, beautiful. You can bring the story of the craftsmanship and how they were originally hand painted and then they were printed. But there also is like sort of a darker story, as these very valuable fabrics were also used as an alternative currency in the West African slave trade. So, this is a very different kind of story. But, as a museum, you choose which stories you bring. And
How do you position the way that you tell those stories, and have you actually modified the way you change them since things like
yes,
the protests,
yes,
Black Lives Matter protests?
absolutely. I think that is really the importance of Black Lives Matter for museums. Museums are much more aware of these kind of blind spots, and that you have to think better of the kind of stories you bring, because there's not, you can decide to bring the story of craftsmanship. As a fashion museum, you could just focus on the craft and the spectacle and the beauty of a piece, or you can decide also to tell how a piece of clothing or a collection or a design has an impact on society, or how and it sometimes means that you also have to talk with different communities and different experts in order to also get to know these stories, because we can be experts, but we don't have all the knowledge. We don't have the truth is not existing. It's I think research is always ongoing, and the question.
So you mean
there's
not one truth or one idea?
No,
there are many different
of course
people's
not.
truths
There's not
and different
one
ideas.
truth to tell. Yeah, absolutely.
And how has that approach that you've taken, how has that been received by the viewing public, or by?
Well, we're only open for 2 weeks, but I think the responses I get also from press, because of course I discuss it also with a lot of journalists asking for our approach, and I think it's been approached in a very positive way. But I always say that it's an ongoing process. It's not that we have found now the way how to do it and how to curate. For me, curation is an ongoing process, and how I curated 20 years ago is also different than how I curate now, and I think it also should be different because the world around me changed. So I really strongly believe that in order to be relevant, you have to always think about how to let the curation evolve, because the recipes we used to make exhibitions maybe 20 years ago or 40 or 50 years ago will not work for future audiences. So you have to keep on questioning yourself. And I always tell my team how important I find experiment. I think you can only make progress if you keep on experimenting. But as a museum, it's also a scary thing, because I'm always the first to say, experiment is so important. But for example, the decision we made with the live performances, it costed me a lot of sleep, because I really was also worried, like, what if it doesn't work? And logistically, it's super complicated to organize it. And I was saying to myself, Kaat, why do you come up with these kind of ideas? But now I'm really happy that we've done it, because it's much. Maybe it feels much safer to just stick to the recipes that you know are successful. And if you curate for 20 years, you more or less know what works with certain audiences, and you can make a spectacular and a beautiful exhibition. But yeah, that's maybe a bit lazy, I think. and I wonder, it's, we know that future audiences, they grow up with screens, they grow up in a digital world, and how do you deal with that? Do you stuff your exhibition space full with sort of interactive screens, and it's very hard to find the balance, because I'm also convinced that the museum has a different time than the outside world, and that's also one of, I think, of the qualities and the beauty of a museum, is that you can come to a museum and to really enjoy, an object for maybe longer than 5 minutes. And I think that is also one of our tasks, to learn also future audiences, that it's not just about consuming images at a very rapid space, but that you also have to take time to look at something, to question something, to think, do I like this? What does it mean to me? To maybe feel an emotion, to maybe get bored. I always tell I have quite young children, and if they say, Mom, I'm bored, I always say, maybe it's good, be bored. It will make you creative.
I say that to my kids, and they hate it when I say that.
Yeah, they hate it. But my mom always told, us as well. Like it's, from time to time you should get bored because it will make you into a creative person. And I never understood it, but now I understand it. And that's why I think the time of a museum should also be different than the more and more rapid pace from our current society, because it can be like I think a safe haven for people to enjoy objects, to enjoy history, to enjoy culture in a different way. But at the same time, we should not become like sort of anachronistic thing. We also have to get along with new technologies, and I also believe in that new technologies can help us in our storytelling.
You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music were by Wargi Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. And of course, please do subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for listening.